You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
We bring in one of the candidates for the Republican nomination running against Donald Trump right now. Will Hurd joins, of course, former Congressman, Texas's 23rd District and a former CIA officer. Will Hurd, we welcome you back to Bloomberg Radio. I want to point our listeners to your statement that followed the indictment dropping 2 days ago. You wrote, "Let me be crystal clear. Trump's presidential bid is driven by an attempt to stay out of prison and scam his supporters into footing his legal bills. Furthermore, his denial of the 2020 election results and actions on January 6 show he's unfit for office," unquote. You know, Will Hurd, that Chris Christie has similar things to say about the former president. What's your message to the rest of the field who seem to be defending him?
My message to the rest of the field, and Joe, thanks for having me on, is real simple. This is a free piece of advice. You don't beat an opponent by kissing his butt or licking his boots. And the fact that folks who want to defend Donald Trump, we wouldn't be in this situation if Donald Trump would have done what every other president has done and accepted a peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump wouldn't be here if he didn't try to pressure the states, his own administration, and then ultimately trying to force Mike Pence by inciting people to go down there and try to hang Mike Pence. We wouldn't be here if he didn't do all this. We wouldn't be here if when he was told that he had classified documents in his possession, he would have turned them back in. But instead, he tried to keep them. He lied about it, got his lawyers to lie about it, and then tried to destroy evidence about the fact that he had this information. We wouldn't be in this situation if it wasn't for those actions. And the other folks that are running in this race need to step up and recognize that, because otherwise you're just running to be his vice president or in his administration.
Well, I have to ask you, as you're referred to in Politico as the purest of the Never Trump candidates, I'm sure you like that. Is that holding back your campaign? If you were giving Donald Trump a hug right now and talking about weaponizing the DOJ, would you be on the debate stage?
Well, Joe. Well, first off, I'm feeling comfortable that we're going to meet the requirements to be on the debate stage. And if your listeners are interested in seeing someone like me hit those requirements, go to herdforamerica.com and donate at least $1. Well, your listeners can probably do more than $1. And so, but look. Here's what I've learned. Be honest, treat people with respect, talk about those things that unite us rather than divides us. And so for me, I have to be honest and look, I recognize I'm a dark horse. I recognize that polling has Donald Trump as in the lead, but the election is 25 weeks from now. We should have learned since 2016 that polling is only a snapshot in time. About this time in 2016, Donald Trump only had 1% of the electorate. And so there are more people that dislike Donald Trump and do not want him to be on a ballot than there is not. And so, look, I'm building a startup. I'm running a startup, right? And what do we know about startups that are successful? They have a great product market fit. And part of having a good product market fit is to know who your customers and who your customers aren't. And so that's what we're focused on. And I'm here in New Hampshire as we speak, and it's about growing networks. Mm-hmm. And nobody thought a black Republican could win in a 72% Latino district, but I did, because I showed up to places that people weren't expecting. And here's what people are frustrated. Even people that have voted for Donald Trump twice, they recognize all of these indictments, and guess what? They're not over, right? There's probably going to be follow-on indictments. The DOJ is going to put the screws to these 6 co-conspirators to try to get them to reveal more information. You have the case in Georgia. There's more baggage to come. And we all know that because of this baggage, we can't talk about issues, right? We can't talk about, was Fitch right in downgrading the United States steps? Or how is AI going to impact every single industry? We know that. Look, I was on the board of OpenAI. We're the creators of ChatGPT. Artificial intelligence is going to upend every single market, not in 10 years, but in 2 or 3 years. The Chinese government is trying to surpass the United States of America as a global superpower. That's not my opinion. That's what they say about themselves. We all have the influence of de-dollarization and their attempts to do that. I know different people are on the fence, but how do we make sure we prevent that?
Yeah.
These are the issues that we
Well,
should
I
be
love that
talking
because,
about,
you know, we like
right?
talking policy here on Bloomberg, and we always try to reserve time for that when you join us, as is, our effort with every candidate. And before I get a little bit deeper with that, because I think you're pointing to a lot of the right topics that Washington can't get its head around right now, beginning with AI. My goodness, if we ever see a bill on artificial intelligence, let's have a special about it. But Donald Trump's talking about you. You see this 2 hours ago on Truth Social? Will Hurd, he writes, a former Republican congressman who couldn't get elected dog catcher, so he dropped out of the race, constantly on Fox spewing nonsense. He goes on to say, no wonder Fox's ratings are going down the tubes. Did your ears perk up when that happened? When the front runner's talking about you, that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. You're getting under his skin. And I had to remind him once. He called me and tried to get me to, get on a bill that was going to hurt, poor people and old folks. It was going to take $90 billion out of Medicare and Medicaid. And, I had to tell him I wasn't there, and he freaks out and starts yelling. He's like, I won your district. I was like, no, you didn't. Hillary Clinton won my district. And, this notion that, look, the guy's a bully, right?
Must have been
and
a fun
he
call.
knows he's a bully. He's a liar, and he's only running in order to stay out of prison. And what's even crazier is that he is using, hardworking Americans' dollars to fund his illegal bills, right? He's allegedly a billionaire, but he can't pay his own legal bills. And so this is the kind of stuff that people are frustrated with. There's a reason 2/3 of Americans want neither Donald Trump or Joe Biden on the ballot. And in any one of these charges, and I think the total charges, right, is like in the 70s now. And it's going to be more. Any one of these charges is prison time. And that means, Donald Trump's 78 years old. He ain't going to be able to survive prison. And so this is what he cares about, not the future of the country, not the people that voted for him, and definitely not American. So he can talk mess all he wants. But again, for those that are listening, if you want to help make sure I meet those requirements, heardforamerica.com, and you can help me tell this to his face.
Wow. I can't imagine what it's like to be in this race right now, or to be even having this conversation in every interview that you're doing. Do you believe Donald Trump will go to prison?
Well, look, so the person, I don't know if you saw Bill Barr's comments about these cases, right?
I did.
And Bill is basically like, these things are serious, and the one I think is the most serious is the one that's clear is tampering with evidence in the national security documents, right? But here's what I would say, right? Like, look, I'm not flying around on private planes, right? And I was on Southwest Airlines coming here to Manchester, and people were giving me the thumbs up, and they're like, "Hey, thanks for being honest."
Huh.
I've been in some cafes and diners and places here in New Hampshire, and people are like, "Hey, we're glad someone's being honest." And look, the people I'm talking to, right? And this is where, and I bet you some of your listeners are these folks. Only 23% of Americans vote in primaries. That's the problem with our politics. And that's split right down the middle between Republican and Democrats. And that's why we only have elected officials speaking to the extreme edges. If more people vote, if that 77% of folks that don't vote in primaries actually got involved, then we would have better options in November. And instead of voting for the lesser of two equals, we can vote for someone that we care about. And when you look at the generational defining challenges that we're facing, we have some serious conversations that we need to have to ensure that this experiment called America lasts for another 247 years. And the only way we're going to solve these challenges is if we do it together. We're better together, and way more unites us than divides us. And that's what the kind of leader that we need. And so that's why it's exciting to be in this race at this time, to draw a sharp contrast between someone who has only cared about himself his entire life. Look, I'm the only one in this race that's been shot at, that people have chased or try to blow up. And that used to not be the case. That used to be the normal place. But a guy like Donald Trump has ignored service and tried to get out of service and use the silver spoon that he was born with in order to get out of those things.
Maybe you think he is the purest never-Trumper. Will Hurd, thank you for joining today. Republican presidential candidate, former congressman from Texas, with some very deliberate thoughts about the former president. We'll see what our panel thinks about it next. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Assemble our panel following the conversation with Will Hurd and everything that surrounds us today in Washington. Jeanne, Zaino is back with us. Rick Davis here, two Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeanne, Will Hurd had a lot to say there. Very few other candidates on the Republican side will say those things. Maybe Chris Christie would be the exception. But I do wonder what the events of today might bring to the discourse on the campaign trail. Is it more of the same?
You know, I think in the short term it is more of the same, but it is so important that people like Will Hurd get out there and get their voices heard like he did today. And I thought he had so many important things to say, not only his description of Donald Trump as a bully and a liar, but also the fact that Donald Trump was very much in his position in the polls before the 2016 election at this time. And I thought really critically the fact that less than 1 out of 4 people vote in primaries, and that's why they are so focused on moving to the right, far right, and far left in these primaries. That's a problem with our system that he points out, and that's something either increase the vote total, which is hard to do, or change the way we choose our presidential nominees. So a lot of things in that interview you just did with him that I hope people pay attention to, because while he is low in the polls, he still has so many important things to say that may resonate as we go forward.
Well, Donald Trump says Will Hurd couldn't get elected dog catcher, Rick, and I'll bring you to this event in Iowa just about a week ago when he said very similar things to what he said on this program.
Donald Trump is running to stay out of prison. And if we elect... I know. Listen, I know the truth. The truth is hard. But if we elect Donald Trump, we are willingly giving Joe Biden 4 more years in the White House, and America can't handle that.
Can the campaign handle more of that, Rick?
Well, his campaign can. I mean, he is the truth teller. And, I harken back to when someone asked him on air if he was going to take the pledge to endorse whoever the Republican nominee is in order to try and gain access to the stage. And he said, no. He said, I'm not going to lie about it. Some candidates will tell you yes, and they'll never intend to do it. I don't intend to do it, and I'd rather stay honest than try to get access to the debate stage. So he is setting a standard that is going to be very difficult for these other candidates who are not as transparent as he is. And I think he is an impact player, right? I mean, it's a misnomer to think that anybody knows who the nominee is going to be today. Obviously, Donald Trump has a sizable lead on the field, but who's going to have an impact in this race? Who's going to actually potentially create a scenario where something changes? And I think Will Hurd is one of those guys. He can actually make that happen. If he ever got in a room with Donald Trump to talk about the state of the nation and the issues that people care about, Donald Trump should run, not walk, to the nearest exit to get away from that guy.
Then there's Mike Pence, who's kind of turning up the heat a little bit here. I don't know if you heard his comments in Indiana yesterday. One of the ideas coming from the Trump legal team is that the president didn't want or pressure somehow Mike Pence to do away with this idea of fake alternate electors. He simply wanted to delay the certification, not end it. And Mike Pence had a reaction.
It wasn't just that they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, essentially to overturn the election.
This is a little bit of a new side of Mike Pence. Jeanne, does it keep progressing in that direction? He could be, as we hear, the star witness in this trial.
He is. He is all over this indictment, and he is one of the very few opponents of Donald Trump in this election, besides the typical ones that we know about, like Christie and Hurd and Hutchinson, who came out and had the most interesting statement because it was the strongest, and he has really doubled down on that in the last 48 plus hours. And so, I think Mike Pence is opening up. Of course, he was tough in his book as well. I'm not sure how many people read it, but since this indictment, he has been very tough on Donald Trump, and rightly so. There's a point in this indictment when they talk about the fact he calls Donald Trump to say Merry Christmas, and Donald Trump immediately pivots in 2020 to saying, you've got to do this on January 6th, which Pence obviously says he can't do. So, it's quite striking how much this indictment is about him. And of course, we all know that his family and he were threatened pretty severely on January 6th by the people who were broke into the Capitol.
Mike Pence seems to think that he's got a calling here, answering a divine calling. Rick, that's just his personality. Will he feel that way when it comes to testify?
Yeah, he'll do his duty. He's a patriot. And I think that when he agreed to go and testify to the grand jury, which is a historic event for any former vice president, to do, that he knew what the consequences of that would be. He knew that if he did that and there was ultimately an indictment, there would be a trial and his presence would be known. And so, we've been talking about this a little bit this week. I can't imagine anybody else who's more directly impacted by this indictment other than Donald Trump than Mike Pence. And what's interesting is it looks like it's kind of unleashed him. I mean, all of a sudden he is more aggressive on the stump. His press in the last 2 days has been phenomenal. And not just because, he's sort of telling truth to power about Donald Trump and the crackpot lawyers that were giving him bad advice, but he just seems to be a different candidate overall. I mean, he's got sort of a hop and a step. And sometimes these things can bring out the best in people.
Spoke with Nick Ackerman yesterday, the former Watergate prosecutor, who talked about timeline here as we sort of argue over all these different trial dates and how they might fit and where he's going to be. This is Ackerman's take.
But I think what they're going to try and do is get this case to trial in January or February of next year, prior to the case that's scheduled in New York with the Manhattan DA and prior to the time that the classified document case is scheduled in May in Miami.
January or February, Jeanne, what does that do to the campaign? That's Iowa and New Hampshire.
Absolutely. And we're going to see Trump, apparently, if that does occur, jetting back and forth between, rallies and court. It's just hard to imagine. And, up here in New York, we are hearing Alvin Bragg say publicly that he would be willing to potentially move the March trial in New York, to fit this in. And certainly that would be allowed. But obviously, Trump's lawyers are going to do everything they can to push this back. And I would also just add, for Republicans, the trial that really is the most impactful still is the documents case. So there is a school of thought that they would be better off going with that one first, although it would be harder to because it deals with national security documents. So there's a plus and a minus here.
Might seem like a crazy question, Rick, but in our minute left here, how does he stay in the race if that trial's beginning while the early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, are voting?
Look, I mean, he's a known entity, right? I mean, the value of him traveling to those places is less than anybody else. And so he believes that these cases are actually helping him win. And there's some evidence that they have improved his standing and increased his fundraising. And so for him, this is just another campaign stop sitting behind the table in front of a judge in a courtroom.
So this is kind of fuel for the campaign. You almost wonder what happens when all the legal exercises are done, Jeanne. But then again, we might all be dead by then.
Oh, let's hope not. But, it is shocking. I mean, we'll just be following him around as he moves back and forth between these. Apparently, it's a new way of campaigning in the United States. Boy, oh boy.
Quite the travel budget for a lot of news organizations. Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, stay with us. Bloomberg Politics contributors with great analysis.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app, or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
Vice President Kamala Harris will not be debating Ron DeSantis anytime soon, at least not over Florida's public school curriculum. She's rejected the governor's offer to debate the state's guidelines on teaching African American history, following, you might remember, Harris's recent trip to Florida just to call him out for suggesting that slaves developed skills, quote, that could be applied for their personal benefit, unquote. Here she is saying no.
There is no round table, no lecture, no invitation we will accept to debate an undeniable fact. There were no redeeming qualities of slavery.
Okay, so that's not going to happen. Nobody really thought it would. But California Governor Gavin Newsom wants that debate. And guess what? Ron DeSantis says he's in. Setting up a pay-per-view event for the ages. Actually, it'll be on Fox, as the request by DeSantis called for, or Gavin Newsom, rather, called for Sean Hannity to serve as the lone moderator for what will be a 90-minute debate that will not include an audience, though it will air live. Let's reassemble the panel for their thoughts on this. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. Rick, does this actually happen?
Yeah, I think so. No telling what's going to happen between now and then.
Sure.
It's a long time away, and who knows, what Gavin Newsom's really eyeing here, whether it's a campaign for president or a debate with DeSantis. But look, I think it's smart on both their sides. We're talking about it today. They're going to get all kinds of new coverage. And by then, DeSantis will pretty much know where he is in this race and can modulate, whatever he says at the time. And they're both egotistical enough to think that they can get one up on each other, and that's why Hannity probably has figured out that it's all good for his brand too.
That's
so
right.
Let's all go. I wish there'd be going to be an audience for that.
I'm all in. November 8th or 10th are the proposed dates here, Jeanne. What's the motivation? Obviously, Ron DeSantis is doing a little chest thumping here. He's running for president. What's Gavin Newsom doing?
Now, is that before or after Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk? Who's
That's
going
a great
first?
question. Think about that as a double feature. I mean, that's $1 million idea.
I love it. I think we do know that many, even Democrats, have said that Gavin Newsom's interview on Sean Hannity not that long ago was the best defense they have seen of the Biden administration in a long time. And so, he is, to that estimation, a good surrogate for Joe Biden. But of course, his interest is far more about Gavin Newsom. And I think what he gets out of there is he gets coverage, he gets press, as Rick was just talking about. He gets people talking about him. He also has a pretty good relationship so far with Sean Hannity, and he is able to make his points. I was struck by his comments, because I did watch it, about the issue of homelessness in California, which is pretty hard to defend, but he did a fairly good job on that. So I think for him, he thinks this is a win-win, and he's going to, certainly be asking for more.
Well, we're talking debates. How about real debates like the one coming up in Milwaukee and then the one that follows? Obviously, we're going to get a whole bunch of RNC debates here between now and Iowa, between now and the time that we have a nominee for that matter. And Rick, I wonder your thoughts on updated criteria from the RNC. It's going to make it even harder to get on stage for the second debate. There seems to be a very deliberate effort here to winnow this field early. What do you make of it?
Yeah, certainly. I think that can be the only conclusion that you make, Joe, is that they're trying to create a smaller field. I'm not sure that's in concert, by the way, with what Donald Trump would prefer. But the idea now that the number of donors is going to go from 30 to 50,000, that you've got like more polling, you have to increase the amount that you're polling in both state and national polls. Honestly, what I don't really understand is why the RNC thinks this is good to produce a healthy candidate. These candidates right now are pouring money into the donor requirement, some paying $20 for every dollar they make. Do you think that those $19 going back to donors is somehow going to be better for the campaign. I mean, the RNC's job is to produce healthy candidates. That means candidates with money in the bank, not spending it to get on a stage. And so, honestly, I think this whole thing is just going to go down in history as a way of just blowing out the field so that I guess they can have somebody not rock the boat later on in the process.
Wow. This is brutal. Jeanne, this is September 27. It'll be at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. Candidates will need to have a minimum 50,000 unique donors, including 200 donors in 20 states or more each, according to reporting that we're seeing this week. What's a guy like Will Hurd going to do?
That's right. I was just going to say it keeps really potentially good candidates off of the debate stage. And we all know that the debates are one time in which we get to see everybody there and somebody could have a standout performance that night. And let's not also forget that this is months before they vote in Iowa and New Hampshire. And everything we see in the polls today can change with a good performance in one of those early states that can catapult somebody out of the early states into the next state and increase their donations and poll numbers. If you rob even the early state voters of that potential of seeing people like that on the debate stage, I think it's a problem. I'm not a fan of this. I understand they want to winnow the field, but this seems really early and really hard to do that to people who might be attractive to voters who aren't paying attention yet.
Well, I guess it answers our question about whether they're going to loosen requirements for the first debate, Rick. What about the pledge? That's one that still needs to be addressed.
Well, I mean, the RNC is not going to address it. They've been very clear that everyone's got to take a pledge, and right now,
that means
people
Trump
like
can't go.
Chris Christie has said, I'm not going to tell you the truth. I'm going to say yes, I'll pledge, and then not do it. Wow. And right to their face, I wonder what the phone call was like from the chairman of the RNC. You can't lie to us and say you're lying to us and not think that we're going to honor that pledge. I mean, honestly, this thing has turned into a joke. And if the RNC wants to maintain their stature as a major party, this isn't the way to go about it.
That's from Rick Davis, everybody. Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor, along with Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analysts, our signature panel. Thanks for listening to the Sound On podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Bloomberg.com.